I'm Frank Peebles. I'm a writer, editor, playwright. I've had a chance to look over a lot of material in my time, and I've even worked with Stan on some past projects. But I didn't know him when he wrote this book. And I wish I could have gone back in time and been part of it, because what a project this turned out to be. This is such an unusual, a unique version of autobiography, and I'd love to have been part of it. I think one of the best parts about this book is how Stan writes about himself, but puts himself out of the picture at times. Often when you read an autobiography, it's so centered on the protagonist that it becomes distracting and can even be kind of selfish in its writing style. Stan really has a humility in the book. He writes the story and lets the story lead the way. He's in it, of course, but he has no problem taking a back seat in the explaining of how things went. Other people become very important characters in these stories that he writes, and even though it knits together into his life story, it's very much about times, places, events, and other people. And he really does a fantastic job, almost a surreal job, of pulling himself back at times to let the story lead the way. In much the same way that Mark Twain writes about the South in Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, Stan writes about his places and times. And like Twain, he really stands back from ideology. We don't get a sense of lionizing or being too pastoral about any of these times and places. The way Twain explains the South is raw and just unfolds as it is, so too do these stories that Stan writes. They just unfold. We get a sense of how he feels about the world and his worldview by the end, but it's nothing that's shoved down anyone's throat. In fact, it's almost like a sunset going down. You just stare at it and no one has to say, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?" You know it's beautiful, and that's the way this book reads.
No mountaintops tall enough to block horizons, just endless knobs that would be greens and browns in daylight, now a dark and eerie landscape under the gray waffled skies of coming night. The evening is chill and comfortless. The moving air is heavy with the silence that smothers. A few raindrops strike stones. Several places to the west, the sky falls in dark threaded patches. Rain is coming. Marlene and I have just crawled over rugged trails and bogs and fallen trees and through streams and many miles to stand and live this vision.
As I was reading the book, I got a sense of W.O. Mitchell's books. W.O. Mitchell wrote a lot about place, and you were fixated on that place, almost like a character in the story in his works. Stan does that really very much too, but the difference is there's action, there's activity. We keep moving, and whereas W.O. Mitchell tends to center us in a specific spot and move in small circles, Stan moves us around all over the place. He has such a diverse life, and we get to go along for that ride. Whereas W.O. Mitchell is like sitting on a train and looking out the window and watching life go by. This is more of like a stunt plane ride where we're flying around all over the place, seeing this, seeing that. It's quite remarkable in that sense that, yes, we get a real sense of place, but we also feel action and feel movement, and that keeps us turning the page. I want to talk for a minute about the size of the book. It's a ponderous tome, as we would say in literary circles, but it doesn't plod. And I was worried about that when I first saw it and took a look at it. But what Stan does expertly is not make each page the next day of his life. And then we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, because that can be tedious, quite pedantic. What Stan does instead is lines up a bunch of really interesting stories, a lot of action, a lot of emotion, and each story is compartmentalized. It's almost set of short stories in and of itself. I wouldn't recommend doing this because it's interesting to go from his youth all the way through into adulthood, but you could just randomly flip through this book and read the stories individually. They stand alone in that sense. But all put together, what a quilt. It's an amazing story. Also, there's photos inside, and the text is larger. So the reason there are so many pages is because Stan's thought of the reader, and this has given us the ability to not have to squint as we look at the page. And I'm really grateful for that, but I really enjoy each story individually as well. You know, it's a real honor to get to talk about this book. One of the reasons I feel that way, I mean, it's a big word, honor. I feel that way because I think I've lived an interesting life as well, but I didn't write everything down. And I think that happens for a lot of us. As we go through the pages of Common Man, Uncommon Life, there's a tone. It draws you in. There's imagery that keeps you held there. It's captivating writing. Captivating, very interesting kind of anecdotes. You get caught up in each story, like listening to someone tell a great fireplace tale.
Monty stares into the water like what he sees is a trick. Can't be real. As if we are watching someone else's predicament, and should we laugh or shake our heads with wonder? But the joke is on us. What we see is real. Lake bottom, stones and sand and waving bottom plants slowly sliding away like an aquatic carpet being pulled from under. Sliding away, we are moving fast, afloat on a rotten island of ice.
But when you think back at the end of it all, one of the takeaways, and I guess there's probably two takeaways. One is that how can someone even survive all of these adventures? There's a lot of action here. It's very interesting, and you do walk away going, wow, close call, time after time. But the second takeaway is, I'll bet your life is interesting too. And from Stan's life comes inspiration to look and consider our own interesting lives. The bear encounters that Stan relates, all of them true in this story, just draws me in and locks me down like a magnet. Bears aren't exotic to me at all, and yet I was on the edge of my seat because I guess from my own experiences, I know that these situations can be incredibly dangerous, and I've had nothing compared to what Stan has gone through. And he maps it out in here in ways that are so vivid, you can almost smell it. And you'll love the book just for the bear stories. And that doesn't even get into the horses and the terrain and all the other parts that are so interesting.